Hello, welcome back to another episode of Angry Activists, episode number 2. I hope everyone listening is doing well today. I am very tired. I just woke up a few minutes ago, and it's also that time of the semester. We're approaching finals, and it's a lot, but we're not here to talk about that today. Today's episode is about the Latino Vote, which is a term I've been hearing about, especially with this past election. And I actually wrote an article about this topic on medium.com if you guys want to check it out. It's really short, and I wanted to kind of expand on that article, and so here we are. Let's get right into it. So I wanted to talk about Republican Latinos and that sort of idea because I've seen a lot of articles talk about this topic. So there's actually quite a few articles that are highlighting just how well that Trump did with Latinos this year and how he did better this year. I mean, he did better overall, I think, with voters, but especially with Latinos. And a lot of these articles that I've read discuss just the fact that he was campaigning in some key states with large Latino populations, such as Texas and Florida, and ultimately we saw that he won those states. And when I think about what kind of Latino is Republican or would vote for Trump, the kind of Latino that comes to my mind is the really religious Latino, Catholic or Christian. That's the kind of person that I think about that would resonate with Republican views, because when I think of very religious people, I think of very old school, very conservative in thought and viewpoint. And with that comes, family values, and a lot of them are pro-life and very anti-LGBTQ+. So it kind of makes sense. I do think that there are a lot of Latinos with very conservative values, and simply I just think that's because of religion. And so I also thought about Latinos who are coming from communist regimes, countries who have communist regimes, and so they get deterred from the Democratic Party because conservatives label them as socialist, and socialism is often seen as painted as a bad thing by the Republican Party, by the right. And although socialism isn't the exact same as communism, communism is a form of socialism. So it's really hard to understand, and even I kind of had a hard time understanding. I had to look up what exactly a communist and a socialist type of society is like, and the main idea is basically the government is taking care of the people, quote unquote, taking care of the people, and they control everything. And sometimes that can be not good because they abuse their power, and obviously the citizens don't have certain rights or can even speak out about the government, or they get in trouble, or they get jailed, or things like that. And so a lot of Latinos who come from countries like that have had those experiences, or have had family who had those experiences, they really get deterred from the Democratic Party because the right has just done a really great job of painting them in this light, right? And I also thought about the fact that a lot of Latinos, and I mean immigrants in general, they come to the United States for economic prosperity, right? And that's kind of the thing that the US is supposed to bring, is economic prosperity, and the fact that anybody can make it, quote unquote, right? And so the right really accentuates this, and really talks to this value to people, and of course that really draws in people. I mean, everyone wants to be successful and everybody wants to be able to provide for their family, so that's one thing. And so with all that being said, I think that Republican Latinos are a very specific type of person, and I just feel like Latinos, we can't all be categorized, which leads me to my next point, which is what this term actually means, right? What does being Latino or Latina actually mean? And so technically, Latino or Latina refers to someone who is from Latin America. So technically, Latino/Latina refers to someone who is from Latin America, despite language spoken. So, for example, Brazil is included, even though they speak Portuguese, but Spain is not included. And I think it's really important also to think about the fact that this term, I believe, isn't really used anywhere else. It's really only used in the United States. I don't think other places really use that term. In other countries, they just are who they are from that country. If you're from Mexico, you're just Mexican. If you're from Guatemala, you're just Guatemalteco. So this term is something that's really only used in the United States, from my knowledge. I could be wrong, but and another term that is often used to categorize, I guess, people from Latin America is Hispanic. And Hispanic actually refers to someone who comes from a Spanish-speaking nation. So location doesn't really matter, or geography doesn't really matter in this instance. So this would include Spain. A Spaniard person would be Hispanic, but they wouldn't be Latino because they're not from Latin America, but they do come from a Spanish-speaking country. But Brazil wouldn't be considered Hispanic because they don't speak Spanish. So, and these terms are often used interchangeably with one another because people think they mean the same thing, but they don't really mean the same thing. And again, these terms are not really used in any other place besides the United States. I guess they want a way to categorize us. So not all Hispanics are Latinos, and not all Latinos are Hispanics. And for the most part, yes, a lot of us are both, but there are some that are just one or the other. And another example that I kind of wanted to bring up, I might do an entire podcast on this. I'm not sure if I would have enough to speak about. I probably would, but another term that is fairly new is Latinx. So it's like Latino, but with an X instead of an O or an A. And this term I've only ever heard being used in academia. So like in university and in college. Latinx is a term that's used a lot, and I never really heard it up until that point, up until I started going to college. It is a fairly new type of term. It's a non-gendered way of saying Latino/Latina. It's supposed to be more inclusive. I mean, if any of you speak Spanish, you know that Spanish is very gendered. So words just have a gender. They end with O or A. And I think the newer generation is just more conscious of that, and we're just using this term to be non-gendered and be more open and inclusive. And so, but what I've noticed as well, there's a lot of people who have an issue with this term. The way I see the term also is, my friend kind of spoke about this to me. It's kind of a way of rejecting the Spanish language. I mean, speaking Spanish is great. I can't imagine not being able to speak another language, but at the same time, if you think about it, it is the language of our colonizers. And I think that's a conversation for another day. I could literally go on a rant about this, but I won't. Just getting to the basics here. Latinx is a term used in higher education most often. And I feel like a lot of the newer generation uses that word. I know I like to use that word instead of Latino or Latina. I guess it really depends on my setting and where I am, but I do prefer to use that word. I think it's nicer. But yeah, a lot of people have an issue with the term and they think it's useless and just say Latino or Latina. And I think it's mostly the older generation who thinks that way. But I mean, I like it. A lot of people identify with these terms, right? A lot of people identify with being Latinx or being Latino or being Hispanic. I know I do. I identify a lot with that term, and I use that in my essays when I have to talk about myself, or in job interviews when I have to talk about myself. I very much do identify with that term, but I also think that it's a little broad, and you can't. We're all very different, right? And this leads me to talk about culture. And you can label us all Latinos, but at the end of the day, our cultures can be very different. I mean, Mexicans are very different in their culture from Puerto Ricanos, who are very different from Dominicanos, who are different from Salvadoreños, and so on and so forth. And so when you group us together, it takes away our individuality, I think. And that's kind of the issue that I have with this term of the Latino vote, because we all have different circumstances. We all have different backgrounds, and we prioritize different things. And something that I kind of touched on earlier is generation, the older generation and the younger generation. And so I think that's another factor to a person's um, political views and personal views and things like that. I know, at least from my personal experience, and what I've heard from other friends, is that their parents slash grandparents tend to be more traditional and conservative with their viewpoints. I mean, at least I'll speak from my culture, from Mexican culture. There's a lot of machismo, and there's a lot of gender roles, at least in Mexican culture. Like, the woman is supposed to stay at home and take care of the children and clean and cook, while the man goes out and works and is the breadwinner. And I just have a lot of issues with that. But again, that's a conversation for another day. But that's the traditional way of living. And again, as I spoke before, a lot of Mexicans are also very religious. I don't know if it's Catholic or Christian. I don't know the difference. I don't care for religion personally, and I don't know anything about it. So I don't know which one it is, but they are very religious, and with that comes these ideas of being pro-life and of being anti-LGBTQ plus, and being very against those things, right? Yeah, and I think our parents and grandparents have these views. That's how they grew up. And the way that, for example, I grew up is very different than the way my parents grew up, and very different from the ways that my grandparents grew up. And so obviously we're going to have very different views based on our personal experiences. And with the younger generations, I'll speak about, again, my personal experience and what I know from my own friends and people around me, is that we're very, I mean, obviously a lot of my friends are in this position where the first in our families to be in college, which is amazing, right? And I think with college comes this type of experience, and I don't mean like the typical college experience, I just mean that we get to meet other people who come from different cultures, or maybe who are very similar to us, and we get to learn about them and how they see the world, which adds that just adds to us, right? And how we see the world, and we begin to realize a lot of different things about different cultures and different people. And so I think that's kind of what has happened with me and with my friends who have gone to college, who have started colleges. We just have a different view on the world. I like to think that I'm more open-minded and am able to see a lot of the wrong in the world than my parents probably did when they were my age. So we care, I think, a lot about different things. I think the older generation is more concerned with finances and the economy, which I can understand. Again, personal experience. I don't want to say that this is the case for everyone. It's just what I know from my experience and from the people around me. And so they're very that's one of the most important things to them. And immigration, with, a lot of people in my family are immigrants, and a lot of people from my friends' families are immigrants. And so that's also a topic very important to them. Whereas in turn, I think with us younger, I'll use the term Latinos. But yeah, with a lot of us younger Latinos that are going to college, again, we have a different world view based on our experiences, and we care. It's not that we don't care about the economy. We do. Personally, I don't know much about the economy. I'll be honest. I'm not educated in that, but I do think it's important. But I also think that education is important, that everyone has a fair, equal education, despite their background, despite their socioeconomic status, um, despite race. And I think everyone deserves to have Medicare, and I think everyone deserves to be able to go to the doctor when they don't feel good because they know they can afford it. I mean, I know personally, I don't have health insurance, and if I don't, you know, if I don't feel good for whatever reason, I'm not going to the doctor. I can't afford that. And I know I'm not the only one who's in that position. And so that's something that's very important to us. At least from for me and for a lot of my friends around me. And we're also very in tune with race issues. I think I've had this conversation with my friends many times about racism, not only in the US, but racism in our cultures. Again, I can make a whole other podcast about that, and I probably will, but there is a lot of colorism and a lot of racism, I think. And again, I'll use the term Latino culture. And I know in Mexican culture for sure there's a lot of race issues as well, and there's a lot of racism. And I feel like the younger generation is just more in tune with that. And so these are the kind of things that are important to us, right? And these things might not necessarily be important to them because they don't really see it in the way that we do. And so, yeah, then there's differences in era and differences in education, and that can really shape our perceptions. And I think that's what has happened with this culture, which makes it kind of hard to categorize as all because, I mean, I'll keep saying this, we just, based on what we see what we experience in our lives and in this world, we will shape our perceptions. And Republican Latinos who vote Republican are a very specific type of person who come from a specific background, and maybe a lot of them are also white passing. Again, with the race issues in my culture, personally, there's a lot of people who are white passing, and I also think that with Republican Latinos, again, this is what I think. This is not a fact, but I think that a lot of them probably identify more with being American than being, wherever they're from or wherever their parents are from. And I think that's the case with a lot of Latinos. I think they come here obviously for a better life, and then they just really start to identify with just being American, because I mean, especially living in this time, there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, people from other places, especially from Latin America. And so yeah, a lot of people probably just identify with being American, and I think a lot of Americans have this mentality of America first, which again, I can understand why they think that, but I also think it's important to think about the people around us, and that's just me. So all this to say that the U.S. tries to label us, and this isn't just the case with people from Latin America and people who speak Spanish, but this is also the case with people from Asian countries and people who speak Asian languages. They categorize them, right? Just the one term, Asian. But there's so many different kinds of people from so many different kinds of places. And they just try to identify us and give us this term. And, again, some people really find comfort in these labels, which, if you find power in these labels, power to you. But I think we must also acknowledge that we're all unique, and just one term, Latino, can't encompass such a wide range of people. And so personally, I don't believe there is or should be such a thing as a Latino vote, given that we're all very different. We have very different backgrounds, different values. And so I just think that it's shouldn't be a real thing. I mean, at the end of the day, it's there, when you go to the doctor, when you fill out paperwork, there's always going to be that little section that says what race, which, first of all, don't even get me started on that. The whole race thing. There's no biological basis for race. It's an idea meant to separate us, which, even though it's not real in concept, there's no biological basis for it. It's very real in perception. So despite it not being real in concept, it's very real in perception for some people. And by that I mean that it's a thing for people because society has made it out to be that way. And when it comes to Latinos, a lot of us don't know our race because, we come from these countries who have been colonized by the Spanish. And a lot of us, and not only that, but also take into account slavery. There was slavery in Latin America, and a lot of us are mixed in that sense with indigenous, African, and Spanish. And I think about that quite often. But anyways, topic for another day. I have a lot of subtopics in this podcast, in this episode. But yeah, thank you all for listening and for tuning in this week. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope that you learned something, and I hope that something from this resonated with you. And tune in next week for another exciting episode. Very excited for next week. So hope you all tune in. Thank you.